Good morning. Thank you.
Morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Gary, I see you just joined us. Can we do a quick mic check, please, and a video check? Thank you.
Yeah, good morning, everybody.
Good morning. We can hear you loud and clear. Thank
Good morning.
Good morning, Member Hendricks. Can we do a quick mic check, please?
Hello, how are you?
Oh, good
Doing well.
morning.
It's Happy Friday.
Good morning, Mr. Hendricks.
Your video's good and your sound's good too. Thank you.
Okay, awesome.
Hi, Erica. Can we do a quick mic check, please?
Good morning.
Good morning. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday.
Hello, Vice Chair Constantine.
Good morning, Tracy.
Good morning. Your mic sounds good.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good morning, Member Blankley. This is Rainey. Let's test your mic.
Good morning.
Thank you. I can hear you well. Thank you.
All right.
Good morning.
Morning, Deborah. It's Rainey. Can we test your mic, please?
Good morning, Rainey.
Hi.
Good morning.
Good morning, Chairperson Jones.
Good morning.
Good
Happy,
morning.
happy Friday to everyone.
Yes, happy Friday.
Happy Friday.
Sarah Herson, can we test your mic, please?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, members in the Chavez.
Good morning.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning, Greg.
Good morning.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Loud and clear. Member Jane, let's test your mic, please.
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. Good
Good
morning.
morning.
Ron, can we test your mic, please?
Good morning, everyone.
Good
Thank you.
morning.
Good morning, Evelyn. Let's test your mic, please.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Happy Friday.
Happy
Happy
Friday.
Friday. Good morning, Member Bert.
Good morning. How are you?
Good morning.
Happy Friday. Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, Carolyn. Can we test your mic,
Hello.
please? Thank you.
Good morning.
Hello. Good morning.
Chair Jones, it's 9 o'clock and I believe we have a quorum.
Great, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Our workshop meeting is now called to order. Thank you to my colleagues for taking the time to attend today's meeting. Tracy, please call the roll.
Yes. Abby Koga. Blankley,
Here.
Burt,
Here.
Carrasco, Chavez,
Here.
Davis, Hendricks,
Attending.
Jane,
Here.
Jimenez,
Present.
Lee,
Present.
Lee Ing,
Here.
Licardo, Montano, Paul,
Here.
Morales, Rennie,
Here.
Constantine,
Present.
Jones. Mr. Chair, you have a quorum.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
A reminder to my colleagues, presenters, and the public, we have this meeting scheduled until noon today. So let's go ahead and get started with the first item on our agenda. Item 2.1, to review and discuss VTA's BART Silicon Valley Phase 2 project collaboration efforts to date. Station refinement update, peer review exchange update. Bernice, Director of SVRT Business Operations, Peter Sokoloff, Foster and Partners, Brandy Childress, Chief of Staff to the General Manager, will provide a presentation.
So Chair Jones, can I say a few words just before we start this?
You sure can.
Yeah, we have a few items that we're covering today. That's why we have a number of speakers. And I just want to make just sort of pull this all together as to what we're going through. Last month, in September, we presented the innovations. That was an effort by the Kiewit Shea Trailer team. And that's a piece of work that we're doing that was really looking at the innovations that can be done with the tunnel. And the contractor's also responsible for the station boxes. At the same time, we had an effort as part of this, the collaboration period that we've had over the summer to look at the station refinements, and Bernice Alanis will go through that process that we used. And then at the same time, we also have the peer review. So we had three efforts that were going on together. The peer review was looking at the original designs and the previous reports we had. And then since then, they have been looking at the innovations that KST came up with, also been part of the station refinement process. So these are all being linked together. So this time this meeting will be looking at the station refinement process and the efforts that we worked with our stakeholders. So I just want to make sure that there's an understanding of what we're doing. A lot of this is stemming out of the referral that Mayor Licardo had, as well as I think you as well, Chair Jones and others. So we are actually taking a large, really using this timeframe at the beginning to make sure this project, with the investment that we're putting into the ground here, that it is really as beneficial as it can be, that it reaches out and draws the most customers that we can get, and that the experience in that is where we need to be to really have a premier transit service. So I just want to say this is the second step in a series of presentations we're presenting the board. So now I can turn it over to Bernice.
Thank you, Carolyn. Bernice?
Thanks, Carolyn, and good morning to our board members and chair. Today, we're here to provide you an update on the station design refinement effort that included workshops with public agencies and stakeholders to explore, as Carolyn mentioned, access and circulation improvements to the current designs of the downtown and Diridon stations in San Jose. I'd like to begin first off with thanking those that we worked with, BART, the City of San Jose, and SPUR for their participation, collaboration, and time commitment. This effort was conducted in parallel to the tunnel and track work innovation process and takes into account the tunnel platform configuration refinements proposed by the contractor for the tunnel and track work. Can we go to the next slide and I'll go over the agenda for this? We're going to begin with the station refinement process overview. Then we're going to look at the contract package 2, the tunnel and track work contract center platform innovations, downtown station refinements related to primary entrance, alternate secondary entrances, Diuredon station refinements, primary entrance, secondary entrances, and next steps. Next slide, please. This is the project evaluation for the refinement efforts, and it shows what Carolyn mentioned, the interrelationship between the tunnel and track work proposed innovations, that's the CP2 innovations, the station refinement effort, which is in the red box, which we're going to be going over today, and then how that is all feeding into the peer review exchange, which Brandy will be giving a little bit of an update following Peter and myself. Next slide, please. The station refinement effort and direction was kicked off in early May to respond to the VTA's board direction to explore opportunities to refine the current designs for the downtown and Diridon stations. This effort explores opportunities for design refinements that could be implemented with the currently approved project or could be accommodated as future or concurrent non-project elements. The effort considers how potential refinements may be advanced within the timelines determined by the Federal Transit Administration, so the project can continue forward project towards a full funding grant agreement. Next slide, please. So we had some primary goals for this program, and they are to improve connectivity and access between the stations and surrounding transit services, to improve the passenger experience and circulation within the station entrance building, specifically the experience going from the fare gates down to the boarding platforms and how you get down to those platforms, as well as identify opportunities to optimize the integration of TOD above and around the station areas. Next slide, please. Since May, we have conducted a series of 7 workshops with BART, the City of San Jose, and SPUR. The first 3 workshops identified evaluation criteria and potential opportunities for refinements. The 4th workshop introduced the tunnel innovations and how they could affect and sort of steer some of those refinements to date. The 5th and 6th workshops confirmed some of the design refinements we were looking at, particularly at the downtown station related to some possibilities for entrances on the southern side of Santa Clara Street, as well as ways we could reduce the number of switchbacks of escalators and elevators and stairs going down to the platforms. As well as at the Diuredon station, we looked at how we could better connect to the future intermodal station and also improve that experience going down to the platforms. The seventh and final workshop was basically a collaborative evaluation process of everything we had looked at. Throughout the process, VTA has engaged stakeholders and the public to solicit inputs. We have presented this information to our CWGs, and then we had a big community social 2 weeks ago where we had the public looking at everything we had been working on through this workshop series. They provided input that helped inform the types of design and refinements that will be presented today. A final report describing the station refinement effort is in process and is being compiled and will include details, descriptions for the refinements explored and the evaluation that was conducted. And we anticipate having that done sometime in October, I'm sorry. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. This shows our evaluation criteria. The evaluation criteria identified in the first two workshops falls into three categories: the passenger experience, urban design, and implementation. With the passenger experience, we are taking into consideration riders of all ages and abilities. Additionally, considerations were made for riders who may not be familiar with the system, those that are traveling or going to events and don't ride the system frequently. That includes families with young children, travelers visiting the area, and other occasional riders. With urban design, we were looking at how the station footprint fits in with the surrounding environment and provides accommodations for future on-site density transit-oriented development, as well as activating some of the ground floor space. Ultimately, the station design refinements need to be implementable, and that includes considerations for constructability, construction impacts, cost and schedule, and environmental considerations. Next slide, please. So as a reminder, the station design refinement effort is being conducted in parallel to the tunnel and track work innovations. The refinements to station designs are in addition to the proposed tunnel innovations presented at the September 1st Board of Directors meeting, and will further inform the tunnel and track work contractor's design. Some of the proposed station design refinement concepts that you will see today are made possible because of the innovations, and others are in separate and in addition to the proposed innovations. This shows you the previous, the currently scoped configuration for the downtown and Diuredon stations with the stacked platforms, and the proposed innovation of the side-by-side tracks with the center platform. Next slide, please. Generally, all of the refinements being considered would benefit from this visual, as you're seeing, of the proposed center platform. Some of the south entrance options that were explored, which will be presented in the future slides, do rely on the configuration of the center platform innovation. It makes feasible the connection from both sides of the tunnel, which is integral for that southern entrance at the downtown station. I'm now going to pass it over to Peter Sokoloff. He's the principal architect for the San Jose stations, and he's going to talk about the design options and refinements that we've explored. Peter?
Thanks, Bernice, and good morning, everyone. If you can go to the next slide. What I want to do is just talk everybody through both the downtown and Diridon station refinements that we've been studying with the stakeholder group. If you go to the next slide, for each of the options that we've been exploring, we are comparing them back to the baseline design or the current design. So I'm just going to take a minute to talk you through and make sure you understand the current design. And when we go to evaluate all of them, we'll be determining whether they're better, worse, or equal on all the various evaluation criteria. So the downtown station currently has its primary entrance between Market and First Street. There's also a second entrance also on the north side of Santa Clara Street between First and Second. And then there's a third facility, which is a ventilation shaft and egress stair that's at the corner of Third and Santa Clara. Go to the next slide. Here you can see the three elements in relationship to the tunnel. And in addition to the front of house elements, there's there's a large back of house facility, particularly at the main entrance, but also at the secondary entrance, which needs to be accommodated. And you can see how they connect to the tunnel, which is underneath Santa Clara Street. Go to the next slide. And now I will show you the refinements that we're currently considering, and there are a number of different options. We've tried to streamline them in this presentation, but I'm happy to talk about them further if there are any questions. We go to the next slide. So again, one of the primary goals with the downtown station primary entrance was to improve the passenger experience by reducing the overall number of escalator switchbacks, maximize transit-oriented development on the site, and also provide opportunity for ground floor retail activation. So here you see the original design for the downtown station. The design intent was to create a large, open, light-filled void space for passengers who are circulating down to the platforms. It has a large circular excavation, and it has multiple escalator switchbacks to move people from the street level down to the platforms. Next slide, please. So you can see in the slide on the left that because of the circular excavation and the compressed nature of the site, there are multiple switchbacks on the escalators to get down to the platform. We're also showing the stacked platform configuration in the original design. If we were to go to a more rectangular excavation, a longer rectangle, then that reduces the number of escalator switchbacks that are needed to get people down to the platform level. And with this central platform tunnel innovation, it would lead to only one escalator switchback to get to that upper mezzanine level above the platforms. If we go to the next slide. So just to clarify for everyone's benefit, these plans are oriented with Santa Clara Street up at the top of the page, and north is actually pointing downwards towards the bottom of the page. On the left-hand side, you can see the red outline of the D-shaped excavation of the current design. Based on the site geometry and escalator orientation, it leaves narrow areas on either side, which are the blue rectangles, in order to support a TOD building above. On the right, you can see how a narrower, more rectangular excavation, if you click next, I think you'll see that the rectangular excavation, which is narrower but longer, allows for wider supports on either side to support a transit-oriented development above the station. And it also improves some potential for accommodating ground floor retail spaces at the corners of those more enclosed areas. Go to the next slide. So there are many different versions of these schemes that we're studying, and we found that none of them accomplish all of the goals. So the evaluation process is one of weighing the various trade-offs between different elements. And some of those elements are whether we're optimizing the structure for TOD above, achieving the shortest travel distance and multiple methods of vertical circulation to the platforms, whether we're able to add ground floor retail space, and also exploring the potential for a free passageway from Santa Clara Street directly to the plaza to the north of the station. So all those are factors that we've looked at in various options and permutations. Go to the next slide. This plan is also oriented so that the north side of Santa Clara is facing towards the bottom of the page. And what you can see, all the current station facilities are located on the north side of Santa Clara Street. So another key goal of our refinement process was to look at opportunities to provide an entrance at the south side of Santa Clara Street. The CP2 tunnel innovations make that feasible, as the central platform and mezzanine facilitate access from both sides of the tunnel. And you can see in the red dashed line, the downtown historic district, which takes much of the southern area on that side of the platform into account. So most of the sites that we've explored are within that historic district. So the project team has been coordinating with the city of San Jose and FTA to better understand both the feasibility of constructing entrances along these sites, which are not yet environmentally cleared as part of the project. Go to the next slide. So there's three different locations that we're looking at. The first location you can see in the blue rectangle is at the corner of 2nd Street and Santa Clara. This site's large enough to accommodate a full entrance with escalators and would in all likelihood replace the need for the current second entrance. The tunnel innovation with the central platform would be necessary in order for the entrance to connect directly to platforms. If you click on next, the second option, because the blue site is a historic building and would need environmental clearance, we've also been looking at other options, which are more sidewalk style entrances, which would, the first one is in green, would be along Fountain Alley. We would still keep a decent width of Fountain Alley open for pedestrian circulation, and there would be sufficient space there for one escalator, one stair, and one elevator to go down to a tunnel underneath 2nd Street and connect into the tunnel from there. And then if you click next, the third option would actually link to our current secondary head house, which is on the north side of Santa Clara Street. So it would have a shorter tunnel underneath Santa Clara Street, similar configuration of escalator, stair, and elevator. The green option would involve digging up portions of 2nd Street, which would impact the light rail on 2nd Street. The third option would involve digging up part of Santa Clara Street. So there are, temporary construction impacts to be weighed against the long-term benefits of providing additional access points. If you go to the next slide. So the design for Diuredon, again, we're just going to discuss the current design first as a baseline for the evaluation. At Diuredon, the current design includes a circular primary entrance between Montgomery and Cahill along Santa Clara. The concept includes ventilation and egress facilities on White Street and an additional emergency exit stair that's on the southwest corner of Santa Clara Street and Barack Obama Boulevard. So evaluation of the refinements includes the consideration of the various tunnel innovations presented by the CP2 contractor, but none of them in this case are essential for the implementation of these refinements. If you go to the next slide, you can see again the relationship of the three elements and their relationship to the tunnel that's underneath Santa Clara Street, the main entrance in the middle of the page, and then the emergency egress stair on the left and the ventilation and egress facility on the right. If you go to the next slide. So the refinements that we've been looking at for Diuredon, if you go to the next slide, are focused primarily on improving TOD potential on the site, as well as identifying opportunities for better intermodal connectivity, particularly to the future intermodal station, and then exploring opportunities for another entrance to the station towards the west. So you can see the current design in this cutaway image, because the site at Diuredon is slightly larger, there aren't as many escalator switchbacks as there are at downtown, so that was not really a focus of the studies at Diuredon as it was at downtown. Has a similar circular excavation and circular shaft, which is very efficient in terms of construction, and also provides architecturally a very open, light-filled space for passengers to descend from ground floor down to the platforms. Go to the next slide. So this is one of the options that we've been exploring, which again, these drawings are facing with northward facing down, so Santa Clara Street's at the bottom of the page. The current circular shaft, which shown on the left side of the page, optimizes construction duration and costs, but it also, as I mentioned, creates a good passenger experience. The current design accommodates a TOD building of about 20 stories above the back of house basement level at the south end of the site. That's the orange box at the top of the page on the left. So what we've been exploring is opportunities to modify the station design to accommodate more high density transit oriented development on the site by changing to a more rectangular shaft, as you'll see in concept one on the right-hand side of the page, that maintains the current vertical circulation configuration that we currently have in the station, but by making the shaft smaller and more rectangular, it provides more ground floor transit-oriented development opportunity, as well as support area to support a structure above the station. If you click on next, you'll see that that would then provide sufficient area for structural support to provide potentially a larger footprint for TOD on the site than we currently have with the circular arrangement. And then this is a second option or concept that we're looking at, which flips the orientation of the vertical circulation elements to more of a north-south configuration. There would still be entrances off of Cahill Street and Santa Clara Street. And one of the potential benefits of this orientation would be that the larger transit-oriented development rectangle you see facing towards Montgomery Street, there would be no interface with the BART station at those locations. So some of the more stringent seismic requirements for building directly on top of a BART station would not apply to that transit-oriented development. So we're still space proofing and confirming that that's the case, but that would be a potential benefit of this arrangement. And if you click on next, you could also then build more transit-oriented development above the back of house spaces, as well as some smaller transit-oriented development, maybe 1 to 2 stories directly above the station. If you click on next, one of the other key things that we've been studying as part of the refinement process is to explore ways to improve connectivity, particularly from the BART station to the future intermodal station, which is shown in this image. So you'll see where the VTA and BART logos are. That's the site of the current main entrance to the BART station, and it's also potential entrance to the future concourse of the intermodal station. And then you'll see there's another black triangle, further up Santa Clara Street on the other side, which is close to White Street, where our current ventilation and egress facility is located. So if you click on next, so one of the things we've been exploring in space proofing is the idea of providing an entrance point to the station and converting that egress and ventilation facility into an entrance. And in order to do that, you can see we would shift the platforms. So the main entrance would access one end of the platform, and this new entrance would access the other end of the platform. The goal would be to provide escalator access to the platforms at this location, but it may be challenging just based on the size of the site. But ultimately, a second entrance at this location would improve access to passengers coming from the Alameda and points further west, and enlarge the overall catchment area for the station. And with that, I believe I will pass it back to Bernice, who will describe the evaluation process and how we're looking at these various options and comparing them back to the baseline design.
Thank you, Peter. Next slide, please. So the feedback that we received through the public engagement efforts was used to inform how the station designs could be refined to best align with the community's desires and how they can or should be further refined as they are advanced. VTA and participating partners conducted a joint evaluation of each of the concepts developed through the process. The evaluation focused on how each refinement improves on passenger design and urban design elements of the current concepts. The outcome of this evaluation will help inform which concepts best meet the station design refinement goals that were identified. VTA is advancing station designs and conducting technical and feasibility evaluations to understand construction, environmental, cost, and schedule implications. We'll continue to update you in the near future and further refine our concepts and advance the technical and feasibility evaluation. And as I mentioned, we anticipate having that evaluation done sometime in October. I'm now going to hand this over to Brandy, who I believe is going to give you a little bit of an update on the peer review process and status. Brandy?
Hello, thank you. Trying to find my buttons here.
Yeah, and thank you, Bernice and Peter, for that presentation. It is an extremely large body of work that's been conducted in partnership with BART and the City of San Jose and Spur. And I just wanted to quickly reiterate, our gratitude that Bernice expressed earlier for the time and the talent that that team has been dedicating to that effort. So quickly, I wanted to just give a status on the peer review. The overarching goal here, as also Bernice mentioned, this collaborative effort is to really explore and evaluate the opportunities that are being presented while maintaining the project's current schedule in relation to securing project funding, the maintaining of environmental clearance, and substantial completion. As you all have heard, APTA assembled a group of independent subject matter experts to evaluate the project's tunneling methodology and exchange and recommend approaches to improve the rider access and experience. And they did begin with the exhaustive list of existing documentation and the engineering records. And that was followed by an exchange of technical information, both on the existing design that we have now, and then all the work that is coming from the KST team. We have held a number of meetings with the peers, which I will say has been a bit challenging because 4 of the 5 peers are gainfully employed all over the world. So we're working, and they're working on their own projects. So we have lots of time differences, but the last meeting we had with them was this past Monday night. And they got a chance to meet with this team here that presented and learn about all the station design enhancement work to date. So we had a nice kind of deep dive. They're looking for a little bit further information on the technical side. They're engineers, so we're looking at giving them some more technical drawings and doing a bit more technical review with them. So as you can guess, that they would need a little bit more time to evaluate this body of work so that they can prepare their findings. And this would come in a form of a presentation to our board and a written report. And lastly, I just, something I stated at the VTA BART joint workshop, the recommendations from peers and work that is coming out of the station refinement effort will be evaluated and considered for incorporation into the project design and delivery. And then as that design and delivery strategies evolve to mitigate risk, staff will be bringing these considerations to the VTA board for discussion and direction. And then the current anticipated schedule and early work packages, which are dependent on the peer review and station refinement outcomes, will also be informed by staff recommendations and board direction. So just wanted to make that clear as well. So that is what I have for the peers, and I'll turn it back.
Can I just add one? I want to add something on this. I think when we started the peer review, we didn't know what the innovations would be coming out. I will say that the original scope for the peer review has expanded in the sense that they have reviewed a lot of the work that we did in the past. And now they're also reviewing the work that we've done over these last 2 to 3 months. And that's sort of an expansion of their scope. But I think all of these efforts coming together and having that review of this work independent from what we're doing, I think is really a major value to us as well. So to let you know, from the original scope that was set out, we have added this element to be able for them to take a look at where we're going with the innovations from the tunnel design team, as well as the station refinement work. And so I think there's one slide that was left right before this slide. I think, I'm not sure who's this, for the board and input today, we really were looking at the station refinement process as to these 3 goals that are mentioned on the screen about improving really around the customer experience, the connectivity, making sure we are opening this up for as a successful a project as possible. Meanwhile, we're trying to balance the goals with the costs and the schedule. So this is a lot of the work that we'll be doing next. We can't tell you that the costs will go, most likely with some of these refinements, they're not going to go down, but I don't think they're going to be enormously up. But we'll see also where the innovations are. But I just think with the multi-billion-dollar investment that we're making, we need to make sure that we're doing this project as best as we can. So We will be updating the costs and the schedule over this remainder of this year and getting the information out to the board. But meanwhile, we'll keep you posted on each of this. But primarily for today is discussing that where the board feels in terms of the direction that we've taken this effort with others and with our stakeholders.
Thank you. If we're done with that part of the presentation, are there any clarifying questions for staff on the presentation? And Director Jane, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I had a question about the downtown station and the south side entrance. 3 options were presented, and option 1, I think I heard you say that if we went with option 1, we could eliminate the secondary head house. And I'm wondering how much money that would save and schedule time. And then I had a question about TOD above both stations. I think for the Diridon station in the current design, you said the TOD would support up to 20 stories. And I'm wondering, when we go and do these rectangular designs and we have the supports, how many stories can we support? And then finally, how much money can we expect to make on leases if we do these larger TOD developments?
All right.
I'll
Go
go back. Thank you. Maybe I'll start the answer, and if others like Bernice want to chip in, feel free to either add to or correct what I say. If you go back to the downtown slide with the second entrances, I'll take that question first, I guess, which was just in terms of whether the elimination of the second entrance, the current second entrance would save time or cost. And that's something that we're currently evaluating. But I think one of the key factors that we mentioned is the fact that the new second entrance that would be on the south side of Santa Clara is not this one, but if you go forward a couple slides, couple more, another one. Yeah, and then, yeah, so this blue site is the one we're talking about. This is the site of the current Western Dental building, is a historic building. And so there's a process in which to do environmental evaluation to determine whether putting a station entrance at that location, what type of impact that would have. That could potentially lead to not an improvement in schedule, but potentially a slowdown in schedule. And in terms of cost, I think that's something that we're still looking at. The new entrance point within the blue rectangle, that would be large enough to accommodate escalators. So it's has, in some ways, it's a more robust entrance in terms of what it can provide for circulation and passengers. But it's probably difficult to say right now whether it's a cost savings or a cost increase, but that's something that the team is currently going through the process of evaluating. So we started out with just sketches of ideas, and now we're in the process of trying to flesh them out and then get some of that more detailed technical impact studied.
Yeah, I think what's important is that when we say that may eliminate the need for a secondary head house, it's that those facilities, if it's a large enough site, could fit on that future site. So we'd still need all of the equipment and facilities that would be in the secondary head house. It's just they could possibly be relocated. So it doesn't take the need away for a secondary head house. It's just that more facilities could have fit in that bigger footprint on the other side. But as Peter mentioned, there are significant environmental considerations and schedule considerations related to that site.
And then if that answers that question, I'll go on to the second question, which was about the transit-oriented development at Diuredon. If we can go forward a few more slides to the Diuredon slides. Yeah, so just keep at this one for a moment, I think is probably a good illustration. So the current design has the circular shaft which takes up a larger portion of the site and therefore leaves less space for structure to support a building above it to come down and hit the ground without having to go down into that shaft. And so it was always challenging to find a way to put a building on top of the circular entrance on the left side. So the transit-oriented development I described is the smaller rectangle up at the top there, which is about 75 feet deep and could, in terms of the floor plate depth and in terms of height, we were saying it's roughly 20 stories. The improvement for the TOD is really more in terms of not the height that we can achieve, which would probably be similar just based on FAA regulations and the proximity to the airport. It's more about the size of floor plate and the size of footprint that we could achieve on the site. So it would be improvement in terms of overall area, but not necessarily in terms of height. So I hope that helps to answer that question. In terms of yield, I think I would defer to Ron on that question, or somebody who's more of an expert in those fields and less an architect.
I think what I was asking was, when you do the TOD, like on the left slide, you have 20 stories. On the right image here, you can also do 20 stories. It's just limited by FAA.
I mean, we're still evaluating that, but that would be the goal. Yes, would be we achieve similar height, but larger floor plate.
I see. And then the other question, maybe Ron can answer, is what type of development? Is it commercial or is it residential?
Sure, I'm happy to jump in on that. So in this image kind of illustrates the differences. In the left image where you see the shallower bay depth, that's inherently going to be a residential building. You can't really create a large enough floor plate to have office users be interested in the space. And I will note that as part of Google's Downtown West, VTA did obtain entitlements to build up to 500 units of residential in the above the Diridon station. But of course, that could always be revisited. The image on the right, and I don't have a square foot calculation unless Peter has a number, but roughly, when you look at that square footage, you need about 20,000 square feet per floor to make it work for office tenants. So the kind of larger floor plate you see on the right does work for office tenants. And if it's helpful for context, I'll just also point out that to the left across Montgomery Street, Google's planning one of its major office high rises. And to the top or to the south, Caltrain itself is planning 2 office high rises on property that it owns to the south of the Diridon BART station.
And rents?
That is a great question. I will say it this way, is that for downtown San Jose, we are all waiting to hear about the first tenant that's been signed for a major new high rise, because that lease has not happened for more than a decade. So what I will say is that when you look at the current rates for high rises, they don't support new construction. But we all know that rents are going to go up. And when you look at the value, downtown San Jose is still a tremendous value compared to places like Mountain View or even Sunnyvale. And so, the market needs to set that rent, and that's kind of part of the evolution of the market for the space. I will also say that for residential, the challenge right now is that when you look at market rates for new residential, they don't support the cost of construction. So again, we're in this dynamic where it's an evolving market. Some of the sort of pandemic spikes in terms of costs and how they relate to rents needs to be worked out. So what we're looking at is that it's going to be several years down the road before these uses become feasible. But I also want to say that this is not an unusual thing in terms of how market cycles work, and also in terms of how places evolve and kind of become new destinations for development. So I know that's a bit of a long answer, but that's why it's really hard for me to say that, okay, it's this rent, or this is the rent we need to hit, or this is what we can see as a result of it at this point in time.
Great, thank you.
All right, thank you, Director Burke.
Yeah, thanks. So if I understood the presentations correctly, are there one set of elevators per station? Is that correct?
No, there's always more than when you say a set of escalators or elevators. Sorry,
Elevators.
Elevators. Each of the stations has multiple elevators. So, for instance, this image we're looking at right here for the main entrance at Diuredon on the left side, you'll see there's two elevators next to the escalators, kind of in the middle of the circle. And so there, for BART, there's generally always some redundancy. It's rare to have just one elevator. Those sidewalk entrances that we were proposing for the south entrance at downtown, those would have probably just one elevator, but all of the main entrances have 2 or 3 elevators.
Okay, and then is there any parking anticipated for the development on site?
At the downtown site, there has been part of the design development framework, the DDF process that we went through. We anticipated approximately 2 levels of parking that would be integrated into that development that would go underneath the plaza space, just to the north of the station. With downtown, with Diridon, I don't believe that there's some, sort of service areas and other things that have been planned in terms of parking, but not a significant amount of parking for the TOD itself.
Yeah. And, Peter, if I might add to that answer, at least for the residential, and we haven't had a chance to really study this for the office, so I'm speaking just for the Diridon residential alternative. While our goal is ultimately that we should not need parking at a site, we also know that from a market perspective, some amount is needed, which would be much less than 1 space per unit. And so the way we've conceived that at a conceptual level, and again, this is before really having a developer partner to work with, is that for the residential building, that off of the street to the south side, there would basically be automated parking. And if you've seen this, it's the kind of thing where it's a driveway and you drive essentially into an elevator, leave your car, and then a lift puts it up to a mezzanine level. That would basically be an automated parking where it can kind of manage the movement of cars and then bring it to the surface when you want to return. And I'll note that the concept there is that mezzanine space is tall enough so that even if we do end up doing that kind of parking as an interim solution, at a future date that could be removed and that mezzanine level would have enough height that it could be converted to occupiable space.
Okay. And lastly, with the peer review of both the original approaches and these additional ones, have they provided any analysis to date? Are we going to get interim reports from them or only something at the end?
Brandy, you're on mute.
I am so sorry. I would say that it's more of a bundle towards the end because, as Carolyn mentioned, they have been doing a lot of the work looking at the past engineering records and what our current design is now. But with the KST work, there's a lot of interaction they need with the teams to get this, the evolving design that's happening. So we thought it would be best if they came to us with not only, having bundled the tunnel and the station design review instead of intermittent updates.
And when do we expect that would be?
We're looking at trying to finalize this in October.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Director Lee.
Thank you, Chair. I just would like to clarify a question that Member Burt had asked. At one of the sites, you talked about only having one elevator. And then I'm looking at the design and there's 2 elevator shafts at each side of the tunnels. But the designs on the street doesn't have the elevator shafts or how it comes to the street level. My concern is making sure that if we have at that one site only one elevator, if that elevator goes down, would that be, that would be problematic. So just asking for clarification on that.
Yeah, could we go back to the slide with the 3 second entrance options for downtown? So you can see, all of these, all of the entrances that we're proposing have a minimum of 2 elevators, and typically more than two. So the only, when I made that reference to only one elevator, it was purely for the green and the magenta colored rectangles there, which are more what I would describe as sidewalk style entrances. So essentially we're working along the sidewalk of Santa Clara Street or along Fountain Alley. So in order to keep them very compact, they would have one stair, one escalator, and one elevator. So there's no redundancy in those, which is one of the reasons why we said with those two options, you would probably maintain the existing secondary entrance, because those entrances would not be sufficient to accommodate the capacity, of the passenger demand for the full second entrance. So it would be supplemental to the current second entrance as opposed to replacing the second entrance.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
I hope that helps explain it.
Yes, thank you.
So say that elevator was broken, then you would continue to go to the second entrance or the primary entrance to get to the station.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I actually have a higher level question. And that is, the refinements seem like pretty significant improvements over the original design. So I just want to have an understanding, like, what has changed, what has created the opportunity to have these improvements, and if there's any trade-offs that we had to make in terms of things that we aren't able to do or aren't going to be as efficient in the refined designs.
So I can start with that in a very general sense. Some of the innovations, like we mentioned, with the stacked platforms at downtown in Diridon, because the platforms would be on one side of the street, that made it very challenging to do access from the south side of the street, because you'd have to either go like over or under the tunnel and then connect back into the vertical circulation that was already occurring. With the side-by-side platforms, with the side-by-side tracks and center platform, facilitating an entrance on the south side of the street and having access to the platforms on both sides of the street is much more feasible. So the innovations, that's why these three efforts are so related. The innovations have made possible some of these station refinements, and some of the things we looked into are in addition, like those shafts going from circular shaft to a rectilinear shaft. That enhances some of the customer experience, but it does need to be evaluated for cost and constructability. So it was not necessarily the initial way that the contractor looked as the most effective and safest way to build those shafts, but we're looking at how we can balance the effectiveness and the constructability of those shafts to both enhance that circulation with the number of runs on escalators versus looking at the constructability and cost. So that's what we're doing right now.
Great. Thank you. Director Perales?
Yeah, can you reiterate again when you expect to have that cost and constructability analysis done?
I'm going to call on Mike Lennon. He's also on this call because that's where we're going through that technical evaluation with the CP2 contractor.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Mike Lane, and I'm the project's engineering manager. And yes, Bernice is right. It's taken, over the last couple of months, we've really looked at these station entrances. Recall that we took a good year and a half to develop the current designs. And on very short order, we're fundamentally changing them. So it's taking some time. You've heard the phrase that the devil is in the details, and the further we get into the details, the more we're uncovering things that need further investigation. Because as Peter mentioned, we're trying to balance with the refinements. We're trying to improve the passenger experience, improve the TOD capacity, and also take a hard look at cost and schedule impacts. So we're getting to the point now where the configuration of the refinements is going to be established over the next week or so. And then we're going to be going into the cost estimating effort afterwards. So it's going to be, as Brandy mentioned, with the peer review finishing up sometime in October, our goal is to finish the station refinement cost and schedule analysis in the month of October as well.
Okay, and then we should expect to hear back on that then November?
I will defer to Bernice.
Yeah.
Brady.
Yes,
think
I would
that's
say
a
that.
realistic timeframe. Yeah.
I think on the actual constructability loan cost, I think it may be more towards the end of the year, or beginning to actually cost and further design those out. So I think more end of this year, first quarter of 2023.
Okay. Just a little bit of personal interest to determine, will I be a guest attendee, or will I be a board member hearing that presentation? So just kind of curious in that regard, because I will say, I'm going to echo what our chair said. I think these are significant improvements, and a number of improvements that I myself have been advocating for. I would say that the biggest innovation of a larger tunnel and side-by-side track has certainly opened up the door for some of these improvements. But either way, it's sort of, for instance, the slide we're looking at, any of those options are better than what we were looking at before, with simply just the one main head house. And so I'm very excited about these opportunities and being able to see what they do cost and what's the constructability and the trade-offs. And I would agree with some of the earlier comments that, is a potential that some of these actually can save us money, because, we may potentially be able to eliminate that secondary head house. So I am excited about that, and certainly the TOD potential. I think that the opportunity here in the Diuredon is important as well. The last question I have is actually in regards to the ventilation and egress shaft. I know that we deferred an action on acquisition process of some of the property there to attempt to give some time to look at any other alternatives. Is that work expected to be done sort of in parallel with this? Or is it now separate work that we're looking at there? And when should we expect to hear back on that?
Mike, why don't you answer that in terms of the review of that?
We're talking about the ventilation and egress facility at Santa Clara and 3rd?
Yes.
Okay. I mean, the proximity of that facility, it needs to serve the end of the platform as from an egress and ventilation perspective. So as we look at the station refinements and look at potential alternate entrance locations, we also concurrently are looking at how end of platform, for example, if we have to shift a platform, does the end of platform egress and ventilation need to shift accordingly? Those are part and parcel of the evaluation we're going through right now.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate it. I know there are a set of business owners in one of the properties there that have scratched their head and wondered why, there's some vacant property behind them and beside them, why that might not be a potential or a better potential. So whether it's that or something else, do you expect that work or that report to come back around the same time then, whether it be December or early next year?
I would imagine that's a realistic time frame, yes.
Okay, thank you. That's it for my questions. Thanks for the presentation.
Thank you, Director Hendricks.
I was going to wait till after the public comment, but we're all going now, so I'll just go ahead and get my comments out of the way. We're showing a secondary head house. Is the main reason for that, is that capacity for the station?
Yes, I mean that's the main reason is both the position and the capacity of the primary is not sufficient on its own.
So you said position and capacity. I'm trying to understand. We're saying we need a second station a block away to people to use it. Capacity, I would understand, but when you say positioning, I'm not quite sure what you mean by that.
It's a combination of the access requirements of demand of where people are coming from is one thing, but it's also in the fire situation. The station design is almost, it's a lot of the features are developed and sized for that fire scenario where you have to have everyone escape, and so you need a certain number of exits from the platforms as well. So even if there were no entrance, like at Diuredon, there's one central head house, but we still have those egress stairs and other facilities in order to facilitate egress in the fire other emergency kind of situation. So with the downtown station, we're in the process of studying, could the primary head house do everything on its own, just for our own benefit to understand that. But I think that the results has been not without some, because the size of the site, including all the facilities and everything, would be very challenging on that site to accommodate everything. So that's something that we're studying. But it's at this stage, I'd say that the second entrance is still needed at downtown in order to make the whole station work.
Okay, maybe I'll have some questions offline about that. Some of my colleagues have said that maybe we could get rid of the secondary head house depending on what we do on the south side. It's not really get rid of the second head house. It would be in the example of the blue scenario, it would be moving the head house, correct?
Correct.
So
Yeah.
we need to make sure you use the right terminology. When do we need to make a strategy decision on whether or not we're going green, blue, or red with the south side? Because if we go green or red, that says the secondary head house stays. If you go blue, that says you could change. Those are some big kind of decisions. So at what point, not as a presentation to the board, but when does a hard decision need to be made about that?
So, Peter, do you want to answer, or Bernice? I mean, really, I think we need to.
And Carolyn, maybe there isn't an answer to that question right now,
Well,
but we need to be thinking of it in terms of there's a hard decision that needs to be made, because there's other, dependent decisions that are going to leverage off that.
I think the question will be right now when we're looking at this, and Bernice or Mike or Peter can jump in. When we look at the building, which is, I think, the Western Dental Building is the site, it was something that was looked at. It was looked at in the environmental document. We did not clear it, and because it's historic, there is a issue of the time frame we could have to be able to move on that. It might run in parallel over time. In that work will run parallel with the work that we have. Now, whether we could open that up or include it within the current contract, we don't know. But if it's a better decision for us, we might want to go there. So those are the trade-offs we're doing right now. And we're trying to figure out the schedule for that.
I'm trying to understand, we would not want to do any more hardcore design on the secondary head house north of Santa Clara if we're going to go ahead and we're going to do a secondary head house south of it. I mean, it seems to me we need to make it, a decision, fish or cut bait on which way we're going to go. So there's a decision point, and I don't know what all the other dependencies are, but it'd be great to see on a chart when that hardcore decision, at least from a strategy perspective of that, we're going to go the red and green dot option, which means the current head house stays, or we're going to go the direction of the blue. I mean, that's a pretty big directional strategy decision, it seems to me.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's one of the things that we'll be working on. Bernice or Mike?
Well, I was going to say, no, you're absolutely right. And it needs to be looked at in the context of the overall program schedule and what it would take to clear that blue property and the impact that would have on the overall program. And Sarah Hersom is on the line, who's the program design manager who's following this issue pretty closely. And she can speak about some of the other parallel considerations that need to go into that decision and that programmatic schedule.
Actually, in the interest of time, I don't want to go into all the details. I'm just saying I would like to see on a chart when that decision is going to be made, because I want to know whether or not we as a board, how much more money we would potentially spend on looking at design about the current head house if we might be doing something else.
And,
I mean,
to be truthful, Glenn, we're not currently spending any money on design of the secondary head house. We've completed that design to the extent that it needs to be developed right now. So we're really focusing on these refinements and the alternates.
And we're working closely with the CP2 contractor because there's interface requirements here and how it impacts their contract. That's going to be a critical driver in all this. So we're laying out very clearly exactly when they need what in terms of the information from the other CP contracts. So we'll be able to get that to you fairly soon, but there is some urgency to it.
Can I just say the interface that's between the CP2 contractor, the tunnel contractor, and this work is that the CP2 contractor is responsible for the station box
support excavation,
shoring and excavation for it. So this is the area. So we need to know exactly what they're shoring and excavating. So maybe Sarah, if you have a few words, because actually I think, Glenn, I think your questions is true. We do need to get a schedule up, but I know you're much closer to it, Sarah.
Yeah, no, I think that's all accurate. And I would say just the short answer to your question, Glenn, is I think we've been kind of working towards, end of the year. I think we really need our fundamental configuration locked down. And it seems like we're making, great progress as far as the kind of tunnel configuration and scope as has already been presented to the board. And I think the station access kind of configuration and locations is lagging slightly, but coming close behind. And, we're waiting for this station refinement workshop process to be wrapped up and then really move forward and make some decisions based on that. And so I think the next step after, this process, which is nearly complete, is done, is going to be, starting to engage with, FTA and others in discussing kind of the environmental timeline and make some decisions about, what's part of the baseline project, the timing of all of that, as it pertains to the overall FFGA. So next few months, I think, is our timeline. And yes, we can certainly get you a high-level schedule to clarify that further.
That all sounds great. It just sounds like a lot of stuff that's going to get done in the next couple months, which is awesome. Then I just wanted to talk a little bit about the customer experience stuff that's being done. And to be quite honest and listen to everybody talk about it, it sounds like cost and schedule is the very last consideration. And I, for one, would be very interested to see on these slides when we talk about potential changes, even if we don't know exact numbers, if we've got the original design and then what some of these enhancements might be, give me a plus or a plus plus or a plus 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 on what it means for cost and schedule. And it'd also be good to be able to understand if we could somehow quantify what is the customer enhancement increase. I sometimes listen to some of these meetings and it's like, yeah, we could improve this. It's a really, really huge cost and it may or may not be a really, really huge customer experience increase. So I would like to see cost and schedule be the first consideration because I'm afraid we're going to be talking about doing some things which are going to really negatively impact the schedule. And we know we have additional things we have to look at as it relates to budget and cost and how we're paying for it all. So I think that needs to be a higher consideration than at least what I've heard it listed in the considerations here. And then my last question is, when is the next board vote that has to happen about something about BART? It's unclear to me, we're getting some presentations and stuff, but when do we as a board have to make a decision? And if we don't know right now, that's fine. But in these schedules, that's what would be really helpful, I think, to see is it's one thing to say here, we're having some information provided to the board, but I think it's another thing to know here, this is when we're actually needing to make a decision.
I think that is a very good question because it is interesting. I do think that like, for example, what we're looking at right now, the downtown station south entrance, that is a decision by the board to change the scope of the project and potentially any cost or schedule implications. So I think that would be appropriate to be coming to the board in terms of a board decision. It could be in conjunction with any changes that we would have. You know, I think most of the contracts right now, the way we're in progressive design build or and then the other contracts aren't out, it's not affecting the scope of those contracts and change orders potentially. So I do think that would be something that we should bring back to the board, particularly particularly the decision to put another entrance at Diuredon on the other side of the station, which I think it draws a large catchment area on the east side or west side of the Diuredon station. But there's reasons why, and it's the board needs to make that decision. Could to an extent they're a policy decision as well. So I do think we should be back. We'll get a time frame for that and get back to the board on that.
Yeah, because I'm very interested, along with Raul, whether or not any of those decisions are going to happen in 2022.
I think we're going to need to make them in 2022. I mean, as part of to not draw out the schedule to an extent, which just means we need to make that decision. And I'm not going to say take the risk along with it, but know that we're going to move forward on this and try to understand what the cost implications or the order of magnitude cost implications would be.
Yeah, and my concern is, you know, we're essentially talking 3 months, and I don't know if we can actually gather all of the information that everybody's going to want to be able to make those decisions. But thank you very much. I'll stop there.
Thank you. And I just want to reinforce Director Hendrick's point to really make a thoughtful, informed decision. And we really need that framework in terms of, you know, the particular data and requirements and trade-offs when we make our decisions. So that'd be greatly appreciated if we can have that.
I have been informed by my staff that we're planning on November. We'll be back to the board in November.
Awesome.
All I'll say is that's pretty soon.
Director Lee?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, yeah, I certainly fully agree with the single bore parallel track. I think that's a great change from what the original plan is. So I think that is pretty much unanimous at this point on that. So very excited about seeing that. Now, moving on to the downtown South Station entrance issue. I had the misfortune to actually work in the building, literally right there on 12 South First Street for 20 years. On that, we call it Old Bank of America building. I'm no longer there. The building has been sold like 4 years ago. But there had been discussions even way back then when I was in the building regarding potentially having a station at the basement off the building, given the fact that I believe it does have like at least 2, if not 3 stories of basement underneath that building. And I just want to confirm that there's absolutely no interest whatsoever in terms of using that as a additional access, right, to the station.
Bernice?
Yeah, I know that when we initially looked at it, there were lots of structural enhancements that had to be done. You know, the challenge with the entire south side of Santa Clara Street is the historical designation of many of those buildings. So the environmental clearance issues on that is very challenging. So we did initially look at the Bank of America, but I know at that time there were the seismic and structural supports that needed to be done that were in the tens of millions of dollars. We have not revisited as part of this effort. We have been looking at that Western Dental basically because of its proximity and its proximity to light rail and such as well.
Right, and absolutely.
If I might add to that, just so you're aware, Member Lee, we've been in regular communications with the owner and developer of the Bank of Italy building. And in those communications, he's never expressed any interest to us in having that type of access.
Okay, good to know, because I do know that they are spending tens of millions of dollars to do all kinds of retrofit, and one of which, of course, is the retrofit that they're doing. So some of the concerns about the earthquake retrofit that might have looked at, say, 4 or 5 years ago, it might have been paid for by those guys instead of having the VTA to foot the bill, right? So I just want to bring that up as a possible discussion point, since that dollar amount's no longer there. I have no skin in this game whatsoever. I just thought that since they already have the 3 stories of basement space up down there, I just thought, having some type of a entrance there, not in lieu of, but let's say in addition. And I think it would be worthwhile to engage with those guys to see if there's any interest. Because obviously, if we can have a entrance in Second Street, like we talked about the green, blue, and red, but additionally, we can have a First Street entrance. I think that certainly would enhance the circulation of this, because as I can see right now, there's a bunch of north side entrances, but on the south side, right, the south, I guess, western side of it, I don't see any entrances at all the way to Market Street. So basically, the only entrance on south side currently is only Second Street that we're talking about, the green, blue, and red option. So, so I just thought that might be a possible, if there's interest of those guys there, or even the folks say between Market and First Street, so that you could actually have entrances on both eastern and western ends of the station. I thought potentially could be helpful. But again, I just want to throw it out as a discussion point to not just forget about it and just only leaving us with only one entrance on the south side. That's all. Thank you.
Yeah, I did want to add that we also were looking, as we were looking at that southern entrance, we were looking a little bit further east from the main head house as well. There was also an expressed desire as part of this process to look at entrances that were a little more towards the east on Santa Clara Street. And that's where we started looking at Western Dental, so further east from First Street.
These are for these. I'm actually thinking the opposite. I was talking about further west, because looking at the station, I'm looking at, say, closer to Market over there. So right now, if you're trying to come on Market, you will be entering from Market on the north side, right? That's the only entrance, correct? As planned. Yeah, right. So I'm just thinking if there's any interest of having on the south side, I think that could be interesting. And number one. Second thing I want to talk about is the with all the design, do we have any interest or even thought about having some type of a retail space when we design these stations underground? Curious enough, like if you travel to many countries in Asia and whatnot, the subway, the metro station itself underground is actually a huge kind of a shopping mecca. I mean, there's so many stores, so many things going on, right? Our stations, generally speaking, is really only a station and nothing else. Has there been any thought at all to have that type of addition so that people could actually not just use the station to commute, but also as potentially a place of commerce, and then probably generate some income from the agency as well? I just want to throw that out. Has that ever been thought about?
If I might jump in on that question, Bernice, it is absolutely something we've talked about, and it brings up a range of considerations. And you're absolutely correct to point out, not only internationally, but even in the U.S., a lot of times we use the example of Grand Central Station in New York, and if you've been there, you know there's quite extensive retail. Our facilities here are quite a bit smaller than those stations. I would also add that this is a topic, and it's something we've thought about. We've also talked to our colleagues at BART. My counterpart at BART that oversees their real estate and their TOD program. And remember that the areas within the station will be under the exclusive control of BART. They will not be operated by VTA. And part of the challenge is to be very honest about it, and this is not meant to be critical, but it just reflects a number of things. BART has never really been able to implement a successful retail program. I think part of the challenge there is that when you have small spaces like we're talking about, you don't have a critical mass. You can't really engage kind of a retail partner that's going to have the expertise and create the kinds of retail environments you're describing with the very modest amount of retail space we would have. And so for that reason, our thought process has been that rather than try to do things within the station, if you look at the adjacent areas on Santa Clara Street downtown, or if you think about on the north side of the station, where we're looking on the rest of the block to, with the other owners, potentially develop 1.8 million square feet of space, including a couple 100,000 square feet of retail space, including retail space around a plaza that will be immediately outside the north entrance, that it's better to try to direct that retail activity onto the surrounding streets and into the development. Similarly, at Diuredon Station, we're looking at the fact that next on the Montgomery Street side of the station, Google in its Downtown West project is planning a high retail street. The disc vision also envisions Cahill Street on the other side of the station in the future being a pedestrian corridor and having a lot amount of retail. And so again, it's a similar thought that we're better kind of directing activity to those retail centers. The final thought I'll say is that with respect to the 28th Street station, while we're not discussing that, if you're familiar with that design, we think there are real opportunities to include ground floor retail around the plaza adjacent to the station that will be there. So that's how we've been thinking about retail so far.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I certainly have no qualms about having retail being on surface or on the ground. But in this case, it's sad to say that a Walgreens on the corner of First and Santa Clara had to close down after one shooting incident while I was across the building when it happened. The secondary head house, I believe, occupies the space where it used to be an adult store. I mean, there's so much improvement that is seriously needed in that whole area. So I really hope that our project would help revitalize that part of downtown. Of course, with Fountain Alley, which is a complete different issue, and with the new the owners now and the new development with the parking structure of the parking lot out there to be built up with a much higher density. So hopefully, a lot of this improvement would help improve the entire area. Over there.
Absolutely. And I would just add, we are working closely with the city on that. And I think from our perspective, we always bring up that really the foot traffic from BART is one of the key ingredients for sparking the kind of retail revitalization in addition to the new development that you're describing.
Right, exactly. And especially when, First and Second Street are two light rail lines right there. And so it is absolutely crucial that this is really the middle of the heart of downtown San Jose. And I think so there's just so much more potential that we could make this a success. So thank you.
Thank you, Director Jane.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on to what Director Lee was saying. I think that it's important to have at least a coffee shop in our stations, and that we should be planning for the water hookups and the electric hookups and a grease trap or vent if we need it. But it should be part of the design so that we don't future-proof ourselves, so that we do future-proof ourselves, because adding those later can cost like $100,000.
And if I might add, I think Director Jane, you're absolutely correct about that. Food is always kind of a fraught subject in transit because BART does not allow food or beverages on the trains. And there's generally a pushback around the idea that, food and so on does bring kind of trash with it. Given the constrained space and given the kind of difficulties in doing retail, what we've been sort of focusing more on is within the space is that we think there may be opportunities in the future for more kiosk retail. So that wouldn't be food service, but that would be more pop-up kiosk kinds of things that can, sell folks various things or so on. And so in the station design, we've been thinking about making sure to locate floor monuments so there's power available in the future to accommodate that kind of activity, because you're absolutely right. If you don't put that in the station on the front end, it's much more difficult to do those kinds of ideas down the road.
All right. Thank you. And again, thank you, staff. We will now take public comment for item 2.1.
Mr. Chair, we don't have any hands raised.
Okay. So we're on to item 2.2, which is to review and discuss the proposed fiscal year 2023 budget augmentation amendment. Greg Richardson, Chief Financial Officer, and Michael Smith, Finance, Debt, and Investment Manager, will provide the presentation.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning to all board members. You're probably going to hear me for the entire duration here, so I apologize for that, but hopefully we'll get through this relatively quickly. There's actually two items that we're going to discuss today. One is about the budget augmentation, and that's the first item we'll discuss. And the second will be more about cash and reserves. And as we finish the budget discussion, I'll stop there and we can have a discussion regarding the budget before I get into the cash and reserves piece to have that sort of natural break. So as we begin, I think everyone knows that back in calendar 2021, the board did approve a biennial budget for fiscal years 2022 and 2023. And also during fiscal year 22 and as we enter 23, there were certain conditions that did change that could impact the aggregate spend that was authorized as it relates to fiscal year 23. So basically, to ensure that there's no issues from a budget perspective, we're proposing to make a few modifications or amendments to that fiscal year 23 budget. Also, in some cases, there's going to be some needed capital projects to simply be corrected, basically due to some errors, and just ensure that those projects and those budgets can move forward as previously approved. And then lastly, just as an overview, there's most likely going to be other things that come up during fiscal year 23 that will require some, call it new spend. Our focus moving forward will be to utilize any savings that are generated during fiscal year 23 to offset any of those potential new items that could come up that aren't necessarily considered right now. And that'll be our focus as we move forward. So we will hopefully not have another or any other budget amendments coming forward in fiscal year 23. And then lastly, just to say this today is really just informational. The plan is to bring this back to the board for the vote on the October 6th board meeting, but we wanted to make sure that we at least addressed it in today's session. So if we could move to the next slide, and we'll just jump right into it. There's three main areas, and this is all focused on what we refer to as the VTA Transit operating budget. So basically what I would refer to as the general operations of the business. There's a total appropriation request here of about $12.9 million. Three key items that are driving that particular request. One is related to the negotiated labor contracts that we approved in fiscal year 2022. I don't believe this is a surprise to anybody, but in the fiscal 23 budget itself, these were not known and therefore not budgeted for. So we've adjusted or done the calculations to reflect an adjustment that would be necessary from a budget perspective related to those labor contracts, which equates to about $7.4 million. And that does basically reflect a hybrid approach of both a 2% and a 4% increase, depending on the time period of when each of those different labor contracts would renew. Additionally, there's a $5 million item that we're adding to the benefit side, and this reflects the action that was taken during fiscal year 22 to provide alternative pre-retirement death benefits to the families of the victims who lost their lives during the Guadalupe tragedy. This does reflect what will be a one-time payment in or before, on or before December of 2022. And then the last item is simply the increase what was originally budgeted from an insurance perspective, given the hardening market and some of the issues that we've had in the past. Although we did stay below the $5 million board not to exceed number, we did see an increase in our overall insurance program go from about 4.3 to about $4.8 million. And so we wanted to make sure that the budget reflected that $500,000 increase. So the next slide, when you're away from the operations side of the house, there's a couple of capital program or project related items that we also want to augment the budget for fiscal year 23. One of them is really related to the MTC hardship dollars that were related to the ARP funding that was received from the federal government. So initially we had $28.6 million identified as hardship, and ultimately it became $30.4 million. So we're simply creating the additional budget for the 1.8 so that we can track and identify those expenses as we move forward. So that's the $1.8 million particular reserve. So I wanted to touch on that and provide some options that we're looking at. So if we can go to the next page. This is really just a snapshot, as I like to call it, of the various funds within VTA and the cash balances that exist for each. The cash availability for each of these different funds. The focus today is really on the VTA Transit Funds, the one shaded down towards the bottom. But since I was going to show that one, I figured I'd show them all just so everyone has the proper perspective of where these balances are. And as I said before, each of these funds, beyond the VTA Transit Fund, have defined purposes for these balances. In some cases, we're a custodian of the funds. In some cases, we're a fiduciary for these dollars. And so they're ability to be used for what we would refer to as general operating purposes is just not there. So it's balances that we show on our balance sheet, but really what we deal with on a day-to-day basis is the VTA Transit Funds. So again, our focus is on that $682.8 million number that's down at the bottom. So now with cash, if you go to the next page, so now with cash as sort of as a backdrop, I want to talk a little bit about reserves. So currently the board has approved or has approved 3 different reserve funds: the operating reserve, the sales tax stabilization, and then one that is referred to as the debt reduction fund. The key element for me when we talk about reserve funds is, from my perspective, by definition, a reserve fund needs to be cash funded. And so my focus on this is to ensure that there is a cash balance that is there to cover any and all of those particular reserves that have been identified from the board's perspective. So if we can go to the next, we'll talk about each of these very quickly just so that everyone is aware of them. So from an operating reserve perspective, as most organizations will have, this is basically recorded, and I'll refer to it at the end of each fiscal year to represent 15% of the upcoming operating budget. And it's really, its purpose is to make sure that should an emergency occur, we have the ability to fund operations and activity for at least a short period of time. And so these funds are meant to be unappropriated and only to be used in those emergencies. And if by some chance a reserve is higher than what is necessary, there is a provision that actually transfers that remaining balance over to the debt reduction fund. So that's the operating reserve. If we go to the next slide, it talks about the sales tax stabilization. The maximum balance that's set for this is $35 million, and that's actually the balance that we hold today. And again, it's by the way it's defined, it's really there in case there's volatility in the sales tax revenue to ensure that service levels are maintained as we move forward. The one provision on this, as far as how it gets funded, is if it's less than $35 million. For instance, if in a particular year we actually used some of that balance to bring that number back up. Definitely, if there's any excess in actual sales tax versus the budget, that difference is recorded to the sales tax stabilization fund until that maximum balance is reached. Now, if you go to the next one, the third reserve is the debt reduction fund. And I have to be honest with you, this one was probably the one that confused me the most and created some angst as far as how I was going to deal with this. So when I first saw this, what I thought this was a debt service reserve fund, and I thought it was funded by previous issuances of debt, and it was the cash funded element to ensure that we were able to fund debt service should some emergency arise and that debt service wasn't available. It turns out that the board established this back in 2008, and as it is being shown in both our annual financial report as well as our budget book, the intent is to reduce long-term liabilities or provide funding for transit-related capital improvements, also identified as a portion of the VTA local funds for state of good repair type provisions. So what's interesting about this debt reduction fund is there is no operational element to it, and I want you to keep that in mind as we move on to the next slide. So the next slide basically shows the comparison or the relationship of cash balances to the reserves and these commitments. And what's an additional line item on this is referred to as the local share of capital projects. And again, as we look at this, the intent is that any commitments we've made from a cash perspective to ensure that the cash is available to cover both those commitments as well as the reserves. So the local share of capital projects in the middle section of the page identifies projects that have been approved. So the budget is there. The commitment has been made from a VTA perspective and a board perspective, and it's the remaining budget that exists for those projects. And so this is basically our commitment that those dollars are there for these projects to continue to move forward. So that's why there's that line item along with the different reserves. And so an argument could be made that in the past, from a cash perspective, in 2019, 20, and 21, we may not have had all of the cash to cover those reserves and that local share of the capital projects. Didn't put us in any particular issues in that particular year, but the theory would be that, should something have happened, we potentially may have not had the cash to cover. In 22, as everything is looking, we're going to be fine as it relates to having enough cash to cover all of these reserves, with that net cash availability of still about $50 million. The interesting thing about this, and this on the 22 estimate number, it's also showing what our operating reserve is calculated to be as we move forward, and then the sales tax stabilization. The debt reduction fund is added to every year from a practical perspective and sort of a procedural process from our side. It's kind of this final waterfall. So any excess amounts, once we've covered all of the reserves and the local share of capital projects, from our balance sheet perspective, from a net position balance, anything remaining is now recorded into the debt reduction fund as a reserve. Now, going back to the definition of the debt reduction fund, it doesn't allow for operational items. And so most of, if not all, of our federal relief dollars, since they have effectively flowed through to the bottom line, are effectively now incorporated in that debt reduction fund. So as we move forward, there's a change that I'm saying that we need to make, and that's going to be some of the steps that are moving forward from a staff perspective, from a policy perspective, that this is to let the board know that we'll need to be coming forward to you sometime soon. So if you move to the next slide, it sort of is identifying potential changes, and they'll be identified in word fashion on the next slide. But on this one, what we would be proposing is the potential of creating or redefining the debt reduction fund into more of a pure capital reserve, and allowing that to be there for future needs, emergency needs from a capital perspective, or help fund long-term projects that we need to be ready for that might be coming down the pike. And then what would be remaining from a net cash availability would be considered more of an unrestricted reserve, which would allow us then to utilize that reserve for budgetary needs as we move forward, should there be deficits that are created by some of the investments. So if you go to the next slide, it'll identify more in words what we're talking about doing. So what you can expect to come forward in the near future for consideration as policy updates is to effectively redefine that debt reduction fund and make it more of a capital reserve, set some minimum balance. On the previous page, I had simply identified an amount of 100 million just for presentation purposes. But ultimately, it's there for emergency or set aside for long-term capital project needs. And then additionally, go ahead and create this new or separate fund, for now termed unrestricted reserve, which would then allow us to mitigate any of the planned deficits going forward, really related to investments in ridership that we just talked about, increased service levels, efficiency, things of that nature. Our ability to utilize that unrestricted reserve would have to come to the board basically during that budget process. So if we knew we needed to tap into that, then we would identify that in this process. So with that, it was an opportunity, given the conversations we've had in the past on the skip and the capital side, and some of the cash and reserve discussions we've had over the last several months. I wanted to bring this to the board's attention and make sure that you knew that this was an option, or this was an opportunity that we were going to bring to you from a policy perspective to ultimately change some of what's already been done historically. And with that, I will turn it over to the chair. Mr. Chair, I'm not hearing you. I don't know if anybody else is.
Nope.
Yeah, can't hear. No.
Can you hear me now?
We got you.
Okay, do my colleagues have any questions or comments on the presentation? And seeing no hands raised, we are going to go to public comments.
Mr. Chair, there are no hands raised.
Okay. So we'll close public comments and we will now go to item 3, which brings us to other items. Do my colleagues have any announcements that they'd like to make? And seeing no hands raised, that means our meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone, and have a fabulous weekend. Stay safe.
Thank
Happy
you.
next
Have a good
Independence Day,
weekend.
everyone.
Have a
Thank
good
you, everyone.
weekend.
Thanks all.
Bye all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
I'll end the meeting for everyone. Thank you.